Hey there, it's Kat and this is Brews and Reviews. Today I'm going to be continuing with my David Gemmell Project and I'm going to be reviewing Morningstar by David Gemmell. If I were to boil this book down to its basest plot points, then I would say it is a dark, reluctant Robin Hood who is selfish and vampires? Yeah, that is pretty much how I would sell this book to you if you didn't want to read the blurb. So to expand on that, this book starts off with a frame narrative of an old bard telling the story of the Morningstar, and we start off with how he first met the Morningstar. So it starts off with Owen Odell, the bard, becoming sort of reluctant friends with Yarrick Mace after an altercation in which Yarrick inadvertently saves Owen and a woman who was being attacked. Their stories sort of weave together and it starts off very much like Robin Hood, except Yarrick doesn't want to be the Morningstar. He doesn't want anything to do with that. He would just really like to get some money and live peacefully. You know, he just wants to go live his life and be a rich man. He's not interested in anything else. Unfortunately for him, he does something that means that rumours sort of spread out of control and he is built up to be this legend of the Morningstar and inadvertently finds himself embroiled in sorcery and the undead, basically. It's not a great time to be Yarrick Mace. I first read this book over 10 years ago and this is actually the first time I've reread it since. I have always viewed this book as a standalone, although I know some people do lump it in with the Draenei Saga, and I can see how you could do that because there is brief mentions of I think Vagria, which is a place that is later mentioned in the Draenei Saga, but it's not really super prominent. There are definitely also links to Knights of Dark Renown, but they're sort of old stories that are mentioned. So if you hadn't read Knights of Dark Renown, then you wouldn't be missing out on anything. It's just a nice little nod to the people that have. But I did find it really interesting to read this one after having just finished Knights of Dark Renown. And that's because I think some of the themes that are established in Knights of Dark Renown are continued in this. And that is that people who are not necessarily good can do good when they put their minds to it. And just because they have done some bad things doesn't mean that they are inherently bad. So for instance, in Morningstar, you are introduced to one of the main likable characters as he is chopping someone's fingers off so that he could steal their rings. So he's not necessarily doing a good thing there, but he has a reason to do that, and then his other deeds sort of make him likable and make you sort of understand the dichotomy between the good and evil in a person and how nobody is truly either. So it's really interesting to see how that plays out, and I think it's especially interesting in the main character, Yarrick Mace. If I'm being honest, he is a completely morally grey character. His motivations are completely self-serving throughout. While he may do things that are considered good acts, they are done because he wants something. He doesn't do them because it will help someone, he does them because it will help him get something. And I found that a really interesting character to be following as the hero of the story. But at some point in the book, it is mentioned that Yarrick is only 24 years old. And after hearing that, I had a little bit of a switch in my mentality because, I mean, a young thief that doesn't have anything else to care for or live for, why wouldn't he just be self-serving and think of himself before anyone else, because no one else has ever thought of him that way. Another character that we obviously get a lot of is Owen Odell, who is telling us this story. So we do have to keep in mind that this is from Owen's memories. He is a bard, he is a romantic. He definitely wants to think of things the way that they would be thought of in a story. So everything that you read is kind of tinted a little bit in knowing that Owen is telling this story. Having said that, he doesn't shy away from Yarrick or any of the other characters' faults. He will point them out. If we were being super critical about this narrative choice and the fact that it is in first person, then I could say that maybe he was being a little bit kinder to some of the characters than they probably deserved. But hey, we can only assume these things. I also really like the nature of stories and rumours in this book and how one small action can be completely twisted into what serves the person who is telling the story. And you see that happening with the antagonists as well as the protagonists, and I just thought that was something that was really interesting to take note of. I think the beginning of this story is definitely more Robin Hood-esque focused, and then that sort of fades away as you get further into the book, because when vampires are introduced, the story takes a turn. The vampires are, in essence, really quite creepy. There were sections that take place in a vampire city that made me quite uncomfortable, in the sense that when you're watching a horror film but you're kind of on edge and nothing's happened yet. I don't know why, but it kind of reminded me of Alien, when they're walking around the ship and you know the alien is there somewhere, but they can't see them, and it's just very tense, and I really like that tension, and I felt that that was captured really well. Now, before I transition into a bit of a spoilery talk, I will just wrap up everything for everyone who doesn't want to be spoiled. So I actually gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and I think despite having really liked a lot of the characters, I did find it a little bit hard to connect with some of them. I don't know if it is because Owen is sort of retelling this story, it's all in first person, so you're only getting his viewpoint on it, and he is sort of weaving a tale as he's going. But I just didn't really feel like I got inside anyone's head, and the main character being a morally grey character, it was really hard to actually connect with him on a level that I kind of wanted to. So yeah, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And I will say that having read this 10 years ago and then not being able to remember anything about it except for the vampires, now that I have reread it, I can kind of see why I didn't remember very much of it, because it just doesn't feel like a story that necessarily will stick with you. I think this isn't one of Gemmell's best, but I still really enjoyed it. If a book is 4 out of 5 stars and I'm saying that this isn't one of their best, then the best are really, really great. So yeah, that is what I've got to say about Morningstar in a non-spoilery section. So if you don't want spoilers, then you should probably leave now, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a spoiler talk, because why not? Okay, so now we're on to the spoiler bit, and I have left all talk about time travel elements in this book, because I think that that is something that is a nice surprise if you haven't read it before, and I didn't want to spoil that for anyone. But I do think it is a really key point to the book. I really liked the nature of tales repeating themselves and good rising to balance the evil. Again, I thought that was a nice little throwback to Knights of Dark Renown, so maybe you should read these as a pair. I don't know, it was good reading them side by side, but I don't necessarily think you need to if you didn't want to. I really liked one of the Vampire Kings. I feel like the other two like died really easily. They weren't that much of a threat. It felt like there was this one guy that was the big bad, but he was still pretty cool. I just really like the vampire city, and I really like that the first vampire that they meet in that city is a child, because that is inherently creepy. Children being evil in horror is just a thing that I like a lot. I don't know, children are creepy. One of the only things that I remembered from the first time that I read this book was Ilka's death, and I had forgotten the character that she played throughout the book, and I just felt really bad. She has a ridiculously rough life, having been raped and had her tongue cut out and then basically becoming a whore, so she never sort of deals with that trauma and can't really speak to anyone, so it's really difficult to sort of get where her character is coming from. I did like the relationship that built up between her and Owen, but I don't know, it's all just a very depressing story. I really feel like if her character had been a little bit more prominent and had maybe a bit more of a role, then I would have felt better about the inclusion of the female characters, because in this book we had a whore, a nun, and an old lady. Those were the women in this book, effectively. Personally, I didn't really like the nun character. She was a little bit of a waste of space to just be like, I fell in love with the man. No one cares, love. No one cares. I also think that the time travel elements and the time that Yarrick spends in the past and becomes Rebane is really interesting, because it seems to change his perspective. He knows at that point that if he goes back, then he is gonna die. He doesn't know the outcome of that fight, whereas he only goes back in time because he knows he's going to live and win and become this figure of legend. So he does have a profound change by going back in the past and doing the honourable things and living the honourable way. It's almost like people are changed by their actions, and I think that that's really fascinating. And I hope to see more of that in more of Gemmell's work. But yeah, that is all of the spoilery section done. If there's anything else that you guys want to talk to me about, then leave a comment down below and we'll have a chat. So if you like this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!